Hello. Hi, Mandy. Hey, Joel. We're going to wait just a minute for.
No problem.
I'm glad you got in.
Yeah, it was easy. I got another email from you today about using Eventbrite or something like that, and I couldn't do that.
Oh, okay. Well, that was how you registered.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, we don't have a big group registered, and I know some people said that they were going to come in and out. So I'm going to go ahead and start, and they can come on.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to start sharing my screen.
Okay. So you know how to do all this stuff. I haven't figured it out yet. I just participate.
Okay. I'm supposed to know how to do all the stuff.
Okay.
Let's see here. Okay, I might have lied. Well, can you all see the screen?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Let me come back out. Hmm.
There we go.
Oh, good. Very good.
Okay, let me see if I can get this to start. All righty. So we're gonna do we're gonna talk about 3 things that white people need to do to be real allies. So the 3 things that we're going to talk about today are what actions are needed, what words help or hurt when you're building relationships, and the difference between stereotypes and learned behaviors and facts. So the definition of an ally, let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller. There we go. The definition of an ally that we use for today's purposes is one that is associated with another as a helper, a person or a group that provides assistance or support in an ongoing effort, activity, or struggle. And now is, in these days, is used more specifically about a person who is not a member of a marginalized or mistreated group, but expresses or gives support to that group. So I'm going to just start with some offensive actions that sometimes we don't think about. And if you've kind of been following my Race Matters post, I've been doing some of these. So saying that people speak well, write well, or think well suggests that you haven't been trained to do those things and that you aren't expected to be able to do them. Of course, that we had a discussion on my post about that the other day, and some people really do mean it as a compliment because it's it actually is true. But it has been the history that when those things are said, that it's unexpected. It's just not something that people are expecting Black people to be able to do, or brown people. Um, so another one is saying that we need to hire the most qualified person. Generally, you would expect that whoever is hired has the qualifications that are requested. Um, so a lot of times if someone Black is hired, then it's said, oh, they're only hired for affirmative action purposes. And we, that overlooks the fact that somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's cousin is part of the network and got the job, and maybe is not completely qualified to do what they were asked to do. So it challenges the intelligence of the person who's been hired. Another one is the reward system. Quite often for people who are working or at school is set up to reward the most prestigious work. If those roles aren't given to people who look like me, then that is offensive. Um, one of the books that I have been referencing that I read a long time ago is called The Little Things. It's The Little Things. And so the lady who wrote the book, Linda Williams, was a writer at the New York Times. And most of the time, the articles that were the most prestigious were not given, the stories were not given to Black people to write. And so when the awards would come out, or the rewards at work would come out, nobody Black ever got any. So that can be an issue. Sometimes we will find, you'll go to work and you'll find out that there's a deal that was created, and the deal was discussed on the golf course or on the tennis courts at a country club that somebody can't be a member of because, of course, it's against the law for segregation now, but because nobody's invited to join that club or join that organization. So oftentimes that becomes a problem. I know this has happened to me several times. I put an idea out there and it was a good idea and it was very easy to take and run with it. But until somebody white mentions it at a later point in the meeting, it's not accepted. There's a problem with it. There's something wrong. Even in things like PTA, I suggested things and did things when I was PTA president and people didn't like them. And then a couple of years later, they would come up with the same idea and it was like, oh, we did that already. And Carmen suggested that and you didn't like it at that point. So a lot of times things get looked over because somebody Black has made the request or has had the idea. If you're in the process of working on something and the person you're talking about leaves the room and you hear, I'm not comfortable with so-and-so being in charge of that, you need to call that kind of thing out because it's code, especially if the person who says it can't give you a reason why they don't want somebody to be in charge of something. We have other kinds of cultural challenges. And I think a lot of times we don't look at the cultural issues because we don't have to. We don't have to deal with those. So in the Black culture, it tends to be suggested that someone is expected to do what they say or to walk the talk. So when you don't see that, you don't you don't recognize that that's an issue. So it's a personal action response. In the white community, it tends to be that you get out of something what you put in it, or you mean what you mean what you say. So it's the intent behind what things are done. And so we are hearing a lot more now of, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. That is what Black people will say, because it's not, we don't care about the intent. We care about what actually occurs, what the result actually is. So we expect to see people doing what they say they're doing. And so if you don't help to solve the issue, especially in the issue of systemic racism, then you're you're not you're just part of the problem. You're not helping to solve the problem. And my business coach was saying something the other day, and I thought, well, I never thought about it like that. So she was talking about problems in business. Things are problem oriented. So you have a problem, you're looking for a solution to it. Problem, solution, problem, solution. And so that goes right along with this. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So the problem is systemic racism, and that's what has to be solved. And of course, Black people can't solve that by themselves. They didn't create the problem, and we don't have the power to solve that problem. So we have to have allies to work along with that. A lot of times it can be offensive to maybe have a personnel review, and things that somebody wouldn't say to you, they'll write it down. They'll make it part of the record. So they wouldn't say it, they wouldn't do it face to face, other than if there is a way that it can be done and not bring any backlash. Sometimes at school, something will go into a child's record, and it wouldn't have been said face to face. Parents wouldn't be told that specifically, but when you look back in their school record, you'll find information put in the record in order to say this child is a problem, and so that follows the child all through school. And I have, once I found that out, I made it a point to always go back every year and check my children's records so I could see what was actually in the file that was going from teacher to teacher. And I also would have to sometimes, if I had to have a discussion with the principal or a teacher, I would have to say, I want to be sure that whatever discussion we have is not going to reflect back on my child. And I don't think white parents think about they have to do that, but I had to do that quite often with my children. So a lot of times in business, we hear about being a team player, or in an organization, you need to be a team player. Team players play by the rules. Who wrote the rules? If the rules were made when you got to the game, per se, and you didn't have any power in writing the rules, what do we ever think about rewriting the rules or inviting those who had no representation at the table to have a voice where they can really speak up about what they feel in rewriting those rules? That's not something that we tend to think about. We just say, you need to be a team player. And I know a lot of times I was a team player. I hated the game, but I was a team player because that's what it took for me to be sure that I had money to pay my bills, money to pay the health insurance. We had to keep a job. And so I know that a lot of people, a lot of Black people have played the game, but didn't like it. So I can't tell you how many days I would put on a mask so I could play the game when I got out of my car to walk into my office, and I would keep the mask on and play the game until it was time until I got home. And I know a lot of people do that. And a lot of these things are not specific to what Black and brown people have to deal with. There's, they could affect anybody, but these are things that Black and brown people have had to deal with over the years. Um, so you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But you have to, if you play for the team. So there were other times when I would play for the team. I would want to say things, and a lot of times people will want to interject and say, this is not fair. This is not equal. This is, but you can't, because there's an underlying reason for why you have to do what you have to do. Um, so that too is an issue. Um, Sorry, we skipped a slide there. So um, I posted this the other day, and we had quite a conversation about what the all blacks like buffet line or bulletin. So in my research, I realized that I often had this to happen, and have had this to happen in the last 6 months. So when something occurs that white people assume has to do with Black people, and it's generally not a positive thing, poverty or talking about food stamps or crime or single parenting, Black people ask for their opinion. So there are more people who are being sought out now for their opinion on government policies. Um, Not a lot in terms of financing or investing or even medical issues. Um, why is it assumed that Black people know how the rest of the Black population feels about something, and it's not a positive subject? Um, so I've been asked how Black people feel about everything under the sun, and a lot of things I don't have any experience with that, but it's assumed that I do because I'm Black. So I grew up upper middle class. Um, and so I don't know about some of those issues. It's not that I can't find out about them, not that I don't have information, but I don't personally have knowledge. So a lot of times, because Black people are questioned about how'd you get that. Um, so how do you afford your car, your clothes, your home, your neighborhood, the school your children attend? Um, Black people often are expected to not have anything, to be impoverished. So several years ago, I was questioned in my neighborhood. We were remodeling our house, and evidently the report was out that a Black male had looked in a fence in my neighborhood. And so we were remodeling. The house was torn up. The yard was torn up. There were contractors all over. And I got in my car I got up. I had taken a nap. I got up. I was getting ready to go to a meeting. And as I walked out to get in the car, a police officer showed up and questioned me about this fence issue, and he said there was a report there had been somebody looking at a fence, and he wanted to know how, why was I doing that? I mean, I never got the option of I wasn't doing it. And the neighborhood that I live in when I moved here 30 years ago was all Black, and it's very gentrified now. And there may be 10 Black families who live in the entire neighborhood. And my family, there's one other Black person who lives on our block, but she's elderly and she doesn't stay home very often. She's with her children. So it tends to look like we're the only Black people on the block. And the police officer did not understand that I lived here. And when I finally made him understand that I lived at the house that I was coming out of, he said, well, how do you, what do you know about that? He said, that house is under renovation. You can't live there. I said, said, I do. I've lived here for 20 years and I pay the mortgage. By the time, he was scratching his head because he kept asking stupid questions instead of telling me what he was, looking for. A second police car pulled up and he went off to talk to him, and I was late. So I got in my car and started to drive off. And as I started to drive off, a third police car came. And it turns out they were looking for a black man in a silver car. I was a black female. I can't be mistaken by any means for um, a man, and I was in a green car. So I did take that up with the police chief, and it's kind of brushed off as being um, a young police officer who didn't know how to talk to people. Um, anyway, so sometimes we have unconscious bias, or we see unconscious bias. And one of the biggest things is a conspiracy theory. So if there are two or three black people sitting, talking together, there's a question comes up, why are you all gathered together and talking? But if you see two or three white people sitting together or standing at the corner, or you don't assume that they're up to something. I used to go to national conferences, and there weren't very many black women or black employees who were part of this organization, and the other women would be very hesitant for us to get together. We didn't sit together. We would only see each other once a year, and we had gotten to be pretty good friends. But there was this perception that we felt like if we sat together, then there would be a question of, what are you up to? What are you doing? And so that precludes African Americans, Black people, a lot of times from spending time together, uh, especially in a work situation. Mistaken identity. I could be at the mall and speak to someone. I'm not in my normal place. And so I'm not recognized out of my place. Uh, or I can be coming into a room, or you could be coming into a room to go to a meeting, and the other people who are in the room don't know you. And so they assume that you're not supposed to be there. You must need to be down the hall. Uh, can I help you find it? It's generally a friendly kind of thing, but it's an assumption that you aren't supposed to be in that place. And a lot of times things will happen, and white people will say, I wish it was the good old days. I wish we could go back to the good old days when things were simple. Well, for black people and brown people, the good old days weren't necessarily the same good old days that you remember. Um, so it says to us quite often that you want to go back to when things were, when there was segregation, when there were, yes, it was simpler times because black people weren't speaking out. Um, so that's, concern. So as I was researching, one of the things I found that I thought was interesting, we don't always call things out as we see them, but we do call out that we see black people as racially disadvantaged. So, but we don't call out that we see white people as racially advantaged. Um, I was taking some training, and one of the trainers said, when there is, she was on the school board, she said, so I make them go back and point out what things are white. She said, because it tends to be, we point out what things are black, and we put those in a negative frame. She said, so where they would have uh, this minority developer or this minority contractor, and they would have that mark. She said, I would ask them to go back and mark who was white so that you could see the number, not the number that were being allowed to do something, but the number that weren't, the number of so you could see the differences. So that's something that we don't do very often. We don't call out where we see white people having advantages. So that it's readily visible. So the balance of power we have to think outside the box to change the systemic racism that's in our policies and laws. And we tend to talk about making things equal. So that means everybody's on the same playing field, and it doesn't matter what kind of advantage they've had in the past. Everybody gets to be on the same place. So in this particular slide, and I love this because this is a really cute cartoon, but you'll see that the man who is standing here, he's still head and shoulders above everybody else. And this little fella down here, he can't see at all. So even though they're standing on the same size box, it's still not equal for everybody. It's equal in terms of where you're standing, but it's not equal in terms of what you're able to do or how you're able to move forward. This side, the man can still see, but he doesn't need a box. This middle person is able to see now, and the little person is able to see. So everybody has an equitable stance because there are extra steps. And a lot of times that's what people are talking about when they're talking about reparations. Um, uh, yes, slavery was ended, but it wasn't, there was no equality there. So let's talk. It's important to have open and honest conversation. A lot of times though, that conversation can be painful to white people because they don't want to hear, or they don't necessarily believe that the things that Black people are saying are true. Um, and you know, it's important to have that kind of conversation, not in any kind of relationship. It's not a true friendship if you can't tell your friend the truth. And so you've got to build those relationships, and that means you have to you have to be intentional about making the conversation occur. And you have to be intentional about hearing and not being offended by what you hear. So we've been socialized from birth to accept certain things or um, to believe certain things, and it's just part of our way of life. So when that happens and somebody comes against what you've been taught or what you've grown up knowing and believing all your life, you get silence, we get defensiveness, we get arguments and pushback when the issue of racism arises. And so, and I've heard this so often, um, I was taught to treat everybody the same. Well, I was too, and that's fine. But that doesn't break down the racism that was already there, that was already programmed into you. Or people need to be taught to respect each other, and that training begins at home. I was taught that as well. Um, but you know, I one of the things that has really become apparent to me is when our children are in preschool or kindergarten, and some of the first things they learn about community is that um, is that uh, community is made up of people who do certain jobs. So they go for field trips. They go to the fire station. They go to or a police officer comes in and talks to the class. And I think about that often, especially I have been thinking about it this year. Um, After Black children often are taught about the police are our helpers, they're our friends, and the children come home and say, "This is what I learned at school today." Then Black parents have to turn around and go, "Okay, yes, the police are our friends, but the police are not always our friends, and we have to be careful what we do, and then we have to teach them how to behave around the police." That is a challenge that white parents don't have to do, and they certainly don't have to do that kind of thing at the age of 4 or 5 to teach that the police can hurt you, um, and you have to be careful because of the color of your skin. So identity politics, this is something, I've got a couple of quotes here from Dr. Robin DiAngelo. So one of the things that she said is the decisions made at these tables affect the lives of those who are not at the tables. The exclusion by those at the table doesn't depend on willful intent. You don't have to intend to exclude someone for the result of our actions to be exclusion. If I am not aware of the barriers that you face, then I won't see them, much less be motivated to remove them. Nor will I be motivated to remove the barriers if they provide an advantage to which I feel entitled. The way we are taught to define racism makes it virtually impossible for white people to understand it. Given our racial insulation, coupled with misinformation, any suggestion that we are complicit in racism is a kind of unwelcome and insulting shock to the system. If, however, I understand racism as a system into which I was socialized, I can receive feedback on my problematic racial pattern as a helpful way to support my learning and growth. How can it be that so many well-meaning white people have never thought about race when so few blacks pass a single day without being reminded of it? Patricia Williams was a law professor. I don't remember which school she was at. She wrote that in the 60s. And then Langston Hughes in 1945 said, "I'm afraid the nerve of some white folks has gone to their heads and affected their brains so that they can't think right, only white, which is too bad because this is our world too, so they had better get over that." And so I think about that sometimes today. You know, that's what a lot of people feel, and that's part of the division that we have, because too often, because racism is so prevalent in the system, which is where we need to go to get underneath everything and begin to remove some barriers. A lot of white people think that that they have all the answers and things need to stay the same. But the browning of America is coming, and it's important to recognize that we are a country, we don't assimilate. We did assimilate, but we're not the melting pot that we have always thought we were, or have always been told that we were. We don't have to give up our culture in order to be Americans. So that's something that we have to look at how to work with. I think, yeah. So let's see what questions I've got up here. And I do want to tell you that I do have an offer, and I'll share that with you in a little bit. Trying to get to the question. I have a freebie for you. So if you want to write this down, it's bit.ly/ALLIESFREEBIE. There's a document that I've done on systemic racism. If you'll go to that link, you'll be able to download that. If you want to talk some, this will take you to my calendar, and we can schedule a short period of time. I think I have about 15-minute calls there scheduled.
Can you text that out?
I will send that out in an email after this is over, and I'll send out a link to the replay if you have anybody you think might need to see that.
Thanks.
You have, so I'm in the chat, and I'm really happy that all of you joined us. So I like this, Joel, that you've often heard people talking about the good old days. Are they younger or older? I'm curious.
Am I coming through on sound? I think I am
Yes.
muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Mostly older, but quite a few people in their 20s and 30s will talk about the good old days, especially when they talk about gentrification, as if, everything was perfect. And that's, it's, you hear that
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a comment about that or want to jump in there? Because I do think about it. I live in a neighborhood called Oberlin,
Mhm.
and it is the oldest Black neighborhood in my area. And so when I moved here 30 years ago, it was an all Black neighborhood, and growing up, it was an all Black neighborhood. But as the elders have died, young people don't live here, and so they have sold their property. And the fact is this is a historic neighborhood because it was built um, um, by the freedmen and the newly freed slaves. It was the first Black housing community in our area, and was actually built on the best land, which was out in the country. It wasn't in the city at the time. And so, as white people recognized that it was at the top of the city, and so you had a better view. You didn't have to deal with the elements of, a lot of rain, water runoff, that kind of thing. White people started to buy this land that was sort of considered in the country, and it's now in what we call Midtown. But the older homes that were built and the history of the people in the community began to be lost. And so, yeah, we do look at it like that. But, part of it is because it's also a tearing down of homes that were affordable. So
Mhm.
we paid tax value for our house when we bought it. And our house is valued at over $500,000 now. And so, if I didn't have the money to pay the taxes, I could lose my house now because the valuation, in fact, the valuation when they reappraised our property taxes last year, our taxes went up over $1,000 in 1 year. And that's a big challenge for people who are trying to make it. I hate this because I used to tell my mom, everybody's on a fixed income, but I'm retired, so that's a fixed income. And so if you can't plan to jump what you're having to pay for taxes that much in a year, it's just hard. Um, let's see, what else do we see? Okay, Stephanie, you wanted to talk about playing by the rules.
Yeah. So, and actually, as we have gone through this, I've thought about it some more. Playing by the rules is just one example of a phrase that, I mean, I had no idea because I hadn't really thought about the ramifications. And yet I know because I've had plenty of policy discussions about how the rules affect all kinds of diverse people. And in those settings, I was aware of it. But I think when white people are shocked that something like playing by the rules can feel offensive. And I think as you pursue longer engagements with white allies and potential allies, asking people like us to list what are some things you think would be okay that are neutral that you could say, and see what comes up. And I'll bet you that a lot of them are like that. They're like playing by the rules, where when you just scrape away the surface, you go, oh my God, of course. But it relates to what Dr. D'Angelo said about the way we are taught to think about racism. And first of all, white people, I mean, I grew up in the South and I was not exposed to many in the 50s and 60s and many of the horrors that took place during that horrible time I didn't know about. And I lived right in Winston-Salem because my family didn't discuss them at home. And we didn't discuss that specifically in church. So we're not taught thoroughly or properly. And then, so we don't have a context for it, and we're not encouraged to re-examine things that we think are neutral. And I think a bunch of us go around thinking that we mean well, and we don't know jack, and I really appreciate this. I feel like,
Mhm.
Just on one thing, um, I'm kind of enlightened, and I can't imagine how good it would be to have a chance to discuss and sort of get to that place with other people. And you are really well suited to guide a conversation like that, Carmen, because of all the experience you've had. But I would encourage you to maybe think about as you explore this, because I think you're onto something in terms of educating white folks. Um, think about making a series of 2-hour conversations where we get to go into some of these in more depth. And so I could see a conversation just about, I thought this was neutral, I thought that was okay, and I could see talking about that for 2 hours and walking out feeling like you'd had your eyes opened. And then there's a world of stuff to talk about. So just a thought as you explore doing this work, and I so appreciate you doing it, and I appreciate you sharing this workshop this morning.
Thank you. I will think more about that. Joel?
So I want to ask you, since we're a small group and we're trying to, talk about what we're feeling about. So let me tell you what I think is a difficult paradox that we deal with. And that, to me, the issue is systemic racism and how we can continue to focus on that. But whenever something bad happens, we focus on the individual and ask, what was in this person's mind? What was in this person's intent? And then when we do that, we take our eye, I think, off the ball, which is systemic racism. It's so easy to talk about an individual and what they did in a particular case. And rather than the exigent circumstances around it, the structures, the inequality, the concentrated disadvantage. And I think it's easy and it's visceral to focus on that's a bad person with bad intents. But when we do that, that takes our eye off the structures that put that person in that situation and led to that bad choice. So I see that. I understand focusing on the individual, but I worry that that's so easy that it takes us away from the larger roots of the problem. I'm just curious how people react to that, what I see as a paradox.
Anybody want to say anything there?
Well, Joel, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that technique of going from the bigger question to the individual reveals a flaw in how we understand human development and how we understand
Absolutely.
our connection to each other and how we fail to understand that we are all connected. I know you've done a ton of work on crime, and you know that was a professional interest of mine for a few years.
We work
And
together.
often that's used in crime. I mean, think about the whole policing question. Before this summer, most people tended to think that it was an isolated incident of one or two bad cops here or there. We did not understand that we could have a situation where 1,000 Black people would get killed by police in a year, because it was one or two, it was individuals. And that has just blown the whole thing wide open. So I think you're really onto something, that dichotomy of, is it individual, is it social? what part of it is individual, what part of it is social, because immediately people want to go to look at the victim and dissect out what the victim did to deserve this. And you see that, for example, with women and rape as
Mhm.
well. That's classic. But I think you're really onto something that is really rich in our society and that we need to really work on.
Just
Linda,
oh,
you want to jump in? No. Terrence, would you like to jump in?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to respond to something I think a couple of points Stephanie made. Um, the first one is she congratulated you, um, for sharing your experience. I just want to say, as a older black man, that uh, Carmen's experience, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carmen, is not unique. This is common among Black
Yeah.
people. Second of all, I'd like to make a reference to a comment when you were talking about, how she can contribute to helping, this problem with racism. I think that's good. And I may be doing the same thing by making this comment, but I want to make this quite clear. As an older Black man, especially, I don't think or believe it's Black folk primary responsibility to deal. I'm not saying you were saying this, Stephanie. Uh, racism. We all have to look at ourselves. First and primarily, and see what's there and work on ourselves. The same thing, the same way we as Black people have been told for centuries that we have to do the work, and still after we've done the work, uh, we haven't succeeded as we should have. So I think it's kind of contradictory. And again, Stephanie, I'm not saying you were saying this, but I just want to make this point that is not, in my opinion, our primary responsibility to do that. That's your work.
well,
We can help, we can make some comments, but I'm just saying that, and not saying that anyone here feels that, but I just want to make that point because I've had several experiences with that, where I've been looked towards as giving the answers, as helping someone to heal, as helping someone to solve their problem with racism.
well, let me respond to that first. So I agree, you're right that somebody like myself has to work on my issues, but I'm coming at it from my perspective and my life's experiences, and I think what's I'm hearing Stephanie saying, and what I hear Carmen is doing, is helping me get a new purchase, a new place to look at those issues. So I will be able to do that because I can only work with the tools that I have. And I think that what Carmen is trying to do is give us new tools. So we will deal with that. Is that kind of how that's sort of why I'm so interested in participating in this dialogue.
And I agree, but I'm just saying, I want to, reiterate and make this point plainer if I can. That's not the primary responsibility of Black people. And maybe you weren't saying that, but I just would like to hear that said more, because oftentimes when I've been in these spaces, I've heard, oh, thank you, as though if, I or other Black people were not there, that the work could not get done. So I understand what you're saying, Joe, but at the same time, maybe you have to work harder. Because, I'm not trying to put this on a financial level, but we don't get paid for this. And we have done many jobs that we have not gotten paid for. We've done many things for free, almost literally. And so, this can be said and has been said as putting an extra burden on us after we've been abused. People have counted on us to be, the unspoken voice, that's going to help and heal a lot of people that are dealing with racism or confronting their racism. So I just want to simply say again, that's not our primary responsibility. There are many things, many work that we have done, we have not gotten paid for. I'm not saying that in reference to this issue I'm mentioning here, but just trying to say that to say, if you can understand what I'm saying, that we have a lot of work to do, uh, and other people should have a lot of work to do also.
All right. Linda, unmute yourself, sweetie. You're mute. Okay.
Okay, so you said, Carmen, that Black people didn't create the problem and they don't have the power, they need allies. And I agree with that 100%. And I agree with, is it Terrence that just spoke?
Mhm.
Yes, because I can't see that on my screen for some reason, but it's totally, we cannot expect, I as a white person cannot expect Black people to educate me personally. There are a zillion million Black people who have, and I appreciate, and I'm not negating what you're doing, and I thank you, Carmen, for everything you're doing and everything you've researched and shown us. But to ask our Black friends, our Black acquaintances questions, and it's not their responsibility. It is our responsibility as white people to to um, to research ourselves. There's so many books have been written, speakers that are on the, I mean, there's tons of information. For example, let me just say, we have an amazing gentleman in our church that is our young music director, Black man, young Black man. And he is amazing. He is absolutely amazing. And for about 3 years, he did his job, and everyone saw how wonderful he was. This is a mainly white church, and everyone loved him. Well, he has started speaking out about his life and experiences and so forth. And
You muted yourself.
Linda, you muted.
sorry. Most people have responded in a very positive way, and some have not. But then little notes will come to him about, well, you could join me and you could help me do this and you could help me. And like Terrence said, we're not getting paid for this. My job is a music person. I mean, yes, I can help you do this. And everyone has so much time, but you can't be everything to every person. Do you know what I mean?
I
So,
agree.
anyways, I agree with you, Carmen, that you need white allies, and it is our job to fix the problem. You didn't create the problem. We created the problem, and not personally, but we are responsible.
I agree. I agree. And I will throw out there, Terrence, that for me, this is a passion and it's part of the purpose of my life. And I have recognized that. It's taken me a long time to recognize it. And part of it is because of how I grew up, moving into a white neighborhood 3 weeks after Martin Luther King was assassinated. So my whole life has been predicated on moving in this direction. And I believe God has put me in places and with experiences for me to do this kind of training. And some of it I do for free and some of it I don't. So this is part of that beginning of training for me, because I seem to have an ear that, or a mouth that people will listen to. And I think that's important. I think that's important because a lot of times we get so emotional about it, regardless of whether we're Black or white, we can't have the conversations. And so I appreciate what you said, and I totally agree with all of that. But for me, I know this is part of my purpose. And my experiences have been very varied and in places that a lot of people don't get to have them. So I just I just felt like I needed to address that because I can't do this and not get paid for it. I have to. I still have bills to pay. So, but Terrence, I'm glad you're here today. You don't know that I know everybody else on the screen from different walks of life, different parts of my life, and you and there was one other lady. I think she had to get off, but I know personally everybody else who is here, and literally they are from either my political work, my with my business coach now, their family friend, or you know, a professor from when a long time ago. We won't even talk about how long ago that was.
Right.
And so this is part of the work that my family has done, and it was inbred into me to this is how I protest. So thank you so much. So are there any other questions, Terrence? Do you want to say something else?
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with what Linda said. And I just want to say also, if I didn't make this point clear, is that we still have to deal with everyday life, you know, as it is and as it has been. Um, it has been proven throughout history not to seem pessimistic, but realistic, that even when we've tried, our efforts were in vain and often backfired on us or were often used against us. Just looking at this historically, once again. And then there was one other point I wanted to make. It's kind of slipping my mind. Maybe it'll come back to me later. But I think it was in reference to that last point that I made.
Okay, jump back in when it comes. If you're like me, stuff comes and goes all the time these days.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Stephanie,
Yeah, I just wanted to, before it comes time to go, I just wanted to thank you for this, Carmen, and to say um, that my comments earlier may not have been, and I am not discounting what Tara said. Well, I really appreciate everything Tara said. I wanted to be clear, since you spoke about your professional work and needing to get paid, that I was framing my comments with the understanding that what you're talking about is what you might offer in the future. And I am encouraging that as a professional item, not to exclude the work I have to do on my own, which is considerable. And I am doing that. I recently bought Abraham X. Kendi's book, and I'm reading that. It's just wonderful. So I just wanted to thank you for this, and let me say that if there's any way I can help you in thinking about what might be appealing for your audiences, that's kind of my background. Terrence is communications and marketing, and so that's really the context for my other conversations with Carmen. I was admiring her mama's work when she was a little baby girl, and so I may not always be the most eloquent person, but I hope this is really just the beginning of a successful enterprise for you, Carmen.
thank you.
Let me also say, I want to second everything that Stephanie said. I think that you should, you know, look for outlets. And if you think there's any way that I could help, you know, that I would, of course, do that. I mean, you know, we each bring different skill sets to each of these problems. And, you know, Stephanie's one of the best when it comes to communication, but, you know, background things, I think I'm pretty good at that. And so, you know, just remember, I think you should do that. And I think that the more people who are reached by dialogues like this, the better. And I think it's each of us not only has our own work to do, but each of us has our own skill set. And there are advantages to comparative advantage in using different types of skills to reach a goal.
Terrence, sounds like you remembered your last point.
Yeah, I wanted to say something into the statement you made about emotional. You know, I don't know how to take that and how you know, because you know, our emotional experiences are real, and I don't know if you weren't saying that, but it's like um you know, it's our many lives experienced. You know, it goes way back and it's been passed down. You know, this is real stuff. So if I or someone come out, you know, sounding emotional, that's who I am. You know, I shouldn't be, you know, faulted for that. I'm not saying you were saying that, but that's the point oftentimes that's made in reference to Black people, or even like women who've been abused, or anybody who's been abused and violated, that, oh, you're being emotional. I really resent that. I'm not saying that I necessarily know that you were saying it in that light, but that's the way I kind of caught it. And I also want to say that, you know, not only are our emotions a part of us, I mean, we are mind, we are heart, we are soul, we are spirit, we are many things. And so again, it's just so many times I've heard that, whereas someone who has been emotionally and otherwise abused expresses themselves and try to get that out, it's kind of like, oh, you have to express yourself another way, or it's not accepted. So I really had some true feelings about that.
And I, you know, I appreciate you saying that.
Me too.
I have heard that before, so I might need to work on me in that place. Yeah, I've had that said to me before, so that could be some of the stuff that I need to work on in me. So thank you for bringing that point forward. So really quickly, I want to share with you all an offer that I have, and I will send this out when I send out the replay for the email. I mean, for the program today. But and if you know of someone that you would like to pass this along to, please feel free. I don't know where my cursor just went. Okay, so this is the offer that I have today, to do a 2-hour workshop with someone, a business or a company, and to help create their statement, their racial equity statement. Because a lot of people are now looking at what companies' responses are today to racism to determine whether or not they want to continue to use that company's service or purchase from that company. And so this 2-hour workshop would be a time to review whatever material a company has that deals with racial inequity, and to help craft the wording for a statement that would be strong and true to their mission and values, and still creates checks and balances, not just some politically correct crap that, you know, we're seeing a lot of things that just say, oh, Black Lives Matter, but do they actually matter to the company, or is that just something that they're saying? And so we would talk about 3 things that would have to be in place to keep their statement strong enough for them to keep their customers and to get new ones. And right now, the price for that would be $150. I will share that with you later when I send the email out. And is there anything else that you all would like to talk about today? If not, we'll probably be doing more of these, and I'll be posting them on Facebook. And I'm adding you all to our email list. So as we're doing newsletters and other things, that you'll be notified about that. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you so much for your support, and you all have a good rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
you.
Carmen. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.